John Mearsheimer has been, or at least I thought so, has been a big staple on American sort of foreign policy commentary. Although my panelists today have said they've only learned about him today, so it's going to be an interesting discussion since they are going to hear some of his thoughts for the first time. Today we'll cover his appearance on Tucker Carlson, where he pretty much spread sort of his thoughts that he almost always does, and it should be interesting to cover. Welcome to the reality show. Joining me today are Stuart Margolis, Jonathan, and Ia Reichel. Thank you guys for joining me today, and we'll mostly cover today his sort of things he said when it comes to Israel, but we have one clip where he talks about Ukraine, so let's cover that one at first, and then we'll go to some opening thoughts as well as commentary. So let's see.
Deep-seated interest in getting us into the fight.
So as long as we're tied to Ukraine, if there's an implicit security guarantee, there kind of is at this point. I mean, there has been. Why don't we have an interest in like controlling the government of Ukraine? So you can't. Well, in other words, why do we have Zelensky running Ukraine, this unelected lunatic running Ukraine, when we have skin in the game? Like, why do we allow that?
Well, we've been content with Zelensky up to now, and the Europeans love Zelensky.
Why?
Because he's committed to continuing the war. And he is very good at public relations in the West. He has excellent advisors. He's a former actor. He knows how to play the game. So he's good at dealing with the West. And he does what we want. I mean, it's not like he's doing things that we don't want him to do.
No, that's right.
He is our man. And once he ceases to be our man, we'll go to great lengths to put somebody else in his place.
But both.
So I wanted to show this clip both for Tucker and for Mearsheimer because there is this like weird duality of basically at the same time America is doing everything for American interest as well as why are we not doing things for American interest. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure if it's from Jonathan or for somebody else, but yeah, I just to make sure. But yeah, let me jump to you, Stuart, first. So, I mean, what was really surprising, maybe you can give your thoughts on John Mearsheimer, but also specifically how Tucker said, why are we allowing Zelensky to be the president of Ukraine? Like, what do you mean? Is he calling for America to actually do a regime change in another country? I thought his last 2 years were exactly against this.
I mean, I can't follow Tucker Carlson's reasoning, if you can call it that, at all. I don't understand this incredible hostility towards Zelensky. You know, I'm sure the man is far from a perfect leader, but he was elected, and I think he's actually, you know, compared to most world leaders, you know, he seems like a fine choice to run the country. I can't imagine what, you know, Tucker Carlson thinks would be a good replacement, given that he seems to admire Putin so much. But it's just, yeah, this hostility that Tucker and others on the right have towards Zelensky is just bizarre to me. You know, they don't seem to have that hostility towards, you know, the leader of North Korea or the leader of Turkey or the leader. No other world leader gets that kind of hostility. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we're talking about sort of pretty much anything in history, politics, anything when it comes to world leaders, the question you should always ask yourselves is compared to what, right? It's, yeah, Zelensky, I think, currently is a good leader, definitely compared to Putin that is actively waging a war against the Ukrainian state. And I think even to some extent when it comes to alternative, again, Zelensky was elected and was elected as a sort of like by the people who are basically done with both the sort of the pro-Russian side, but also the sort of like this weird, basically kleptocratic sort of like pro-Western side. Like Zelensky was elected to large part by Eastern regions, by the sort of like more Russian regions. When it comes to the Western regions, they were voting for his opponent. So again, Jonathan, yeah, any opening thoughts on either Mearsheimer or even, yeah, Tucker's yeah.
Just so how often the guests of Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens prey on the ignorance of their audience, the historical ignorance of their audience. I mean, to posit that Zelensky is an unelected lunatic and that Zelensky wants to continue the war, I mean, that is exactly the opposite of everything that I've seen Zelensky say now for years. So it's almost as if they live in an alternative universe and banking on the fact that their audience is ignorant not to know any other history.
We have a super chat from Shona. Thank you so much. She says, I'm pretty sure it's just because Zelensky has some Jewish heritage. It is Tucker we're talking about. I think sort of like his obsession with Zelensky started even before his sort of like obsession with Israel. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's that. I think even if there was a different leader, if it was a leader that was, I mean, just think about how he says, right? Continuous war. So defending yourself against an aggressive state that is trying to take away, break apart parts of your country, that means you want to continue the war, the fact that you don't surrender. So pretty much anybody, and even just take that, like when he's talking about that there should be elections in Ukraine, let's just imagine if there was. It's not like the person who gets elected will be some kind of pro-Russian appeaser. If you look at the potential candidates for a president, it would be like the former chief of staff of the Ukrainian forces. I don't think that guy is going to be, I think his name is Zaluzhny, if I remember correctly. I don't think that guy is going to be very appeasing when it comes to Russian state. But let me jump to you, Iyar, now for some of your opening thoughts about either John Mearsheimer himself or sort of just this. Basically, I think he was the one who popularized this sort of anti-American view almost of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, or anti-Western view that basically we have caused this war.
All right, so I'll start with the point on Zelensky and move on to the broader interview. The fact that Zelensky was elected in the context of his pro-Russian rival, in the context of the threats from Russia, basically the implicit message from Russia is you better elect a pro-Russian candidate or else you will get from us, which Ukraine had. The fact that Zelensky was still elected is an evidence that the people of Ukraine, the majority of the people of Ukraine, prefer Western culture, prefer freedom over a Russia-style tyrannical regime. And unlike Tucker Carlson and Mearsheimer's, the Ukrainian people have had a taste of both. They have been under tyrannical Soviet influence. They've been a part of the Soviet Union, and they have broken free and lived a life approaching more and more into a healthy Western society. So that's first, and that's of course a thing they're completely ignoring. Now, regarding Mearsheimer's, he claims he's a realist. Now, let me give you an example of his realism. So, why does he justify the Russian invasion over Ukraine? Well, he says it's a rational response to NATO expanding. And this is ridiculous because NATO is a defensive alliance against the aggression of Soviet Union and then Russia. And in fact, the aggressor play here is Russia. And we can see it with Georgia and we can see it with Ukraine. And it's just ridiculous that since your neighbors are joining a defensive alliance, you as aggressor sees it as an act of aggression because it prevents you from invading your neighboring, right-respecting nations. This is just absurd. Now, let's look at the double standard because, okay, Ukraine joining NATO deems for Mearsheimer's as a justification for Russia to attack Ukraine, but October 7th is not a justification for Israel to fight against Gaza. And he does amazing logical juggling, like he reframes the October 7th as an excuse for Israel to attack. He never, he evades the atrocities. He never mentions the rape and the murder and the hostages. He just sees October 7th as an excuse. He shifts responsibility for the Israeli regime. And he just like tries to neutralize the event and ignoring completely the moral implications.
I think you got muted or something.
You just muted yourself.
No, I maybe with your AirPods or something. It like you touched something and it turned off.
But when I talk, I see green. Okay.
Now
so, all right. So I just want to add on that. I think I have a network problem. Let me close some windows. Sorry. Okay, I'll go on. So I want to add on that in the more to figure out the way of thought, because obviously there is something completely irrational here. And the process, our friend here, what's his name? I forgot. Hold on.
Mearsheimer?
Yeah, Mearsheimer's. What he's doing is a process of rationalization. Now, unlike being rational, rationalization is a completely different process. And that is the use of logic, but detached from reality and from context. It happens when someone desires a certain conclusion, wants to reach a certain conclusion for whatever reason. So he's basically self-sabotaging his thought process to reach this conclusion. He's abusing his own logic. Because we have to understand preferring objectivity and adhering to reality is a volitional choice. It demands discipline. On the other hand, rationalization is like a drug addiction because people get addicted to their false conclusions and their false premises, and that corrupts their character and inclines the rationalist to double down on his rationalization, and that is already based on false premises. And in Mearsheimer's case, I can see no other motive to his rationalization other just, good old hatred for self. And now it's in the form of anti-Semitism or anti-Americanism or turning to Russia against Ukraine. And he's like going back 100 years to find obscure statements to frame Zionism as an evil ideology and completely ignores what the followers of Palestinism, the leaders and the artists and the people are saying in the present. So this is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and we'll cover a lot of that in the upcoming clips. But since most of the rest of the clips are going to be about Israel, I'll just do a quick round on Ukraine and quick comment on Yar. Because, what you always see when it comes to these realists is every dictatorship has a right to be realist, but none of the Western countries do, right? It's understandable that Russia is afraid of the expanding NATO, but somehow it's not understandable that Ukraine would want to be in NATO because of expanding Russia. It's understandable Iran wants to develop nuclear weapons because they, want to fight or want to defend themselves against the Western imperialism. But it's not understandable for Israel to not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. It's not understandable that America would want to prevent that. It's understandable China wants to expand. It's not understandable that we want to defend ourselves. This is what you'll always see. So just quickly, Stuart, any sort of quick points on Ukraine, and then we'll move on to Israeli points.
I think Yar made the points that I was going to make. It really is astounding to me that this Mearsheimer's ability to rationalize. I think every human can do it to some extent, and we all if you have integrity, you try not to. But this guy clearly has just no integrity, and I was astonished the level of rationalization that he goes to, both about Ukraine and about Israel. It's really astonishing, because he's clearly not a stupid man, which just makes it worse.
Jonathan? Oh, you're muted.
Only that it's given such a wide audience on the Tucker show, which, kind of now, the way I guess it seems to get clicks or to get views is to specialize in all the controversial conspiracy that, only we're going to bring it to you. And Candace does a lot of this as well. So, I mean, I'm just sorry that not only is it ignorant, but that it gets such a widespread platform on Tucker's obviously anti-American channel.
We have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much, and a super chat from Gail, thank you so much. So let's listen to a bit more of Mearsheimer.
Right. So
I don't understand, since you raised it, what is the connection? The same people who are telling me we need to fight a regime change war against Iran are the same ones who are hysterical about supporting Ukraine and continuing our war against Russia. The Mark Levins and then the smarter people, but same orientation. What do they have in common? I don't really understand.
Well, you have a foreign policy establishment, whether you're talking about the Republican side or you're talking about the Democratic side, that is deeply committed to pursuing hawkish foreign policy.
Just for its own sake?
No, they believe that that's what's good for the United States. They believe we should spend exceedingly large amounts of money on defense, that we should be willing to use military force in a rather liberal fashion. They believe that military force can solve all sorts of problems. They believe that the United States, and this was certainly true during the unipolar moment, can use that military force to spread liberal democracy around the world. We can spread democracy at the end of a rifle barrel. This is what the Bush doctrine was all about in the Middle East. Iraq was just the first stop on the train line, right? We were going to do Iran, Syria, and eventually everybody would just throw up their hands. We were going to democratize the entire Middle East, and we were going to use military force to do that. So we are, in a very important way, addicted to war. Now, it's important to emphasize that a lot of this has to do with Israel.
Well, we'll keep a lot of it has to do with Israel, although I do want to kind of mention it because, again, when it comes to sort of any ideology, what is oftentimes important is like internal consistency. And this guy is supposed to be, I'm not necessarily sure if he calls himself a historian, but sort of like a foreign policy expert or so-called expert that has been involved in this for a while. And he says that the sort of American establishment has this sort of this foreign policy of hawkish war, and it has to do large part thanks to Israel. But then he goes to say that this started with Iraq war. So only 20 years back, this has to do with Israel, but we ignore the fact that America has been in the Middle East since sort of the end of World War II. Like this whole thing isn't really fitting for me. Stuart, any thoughts about what else did they mention? The sort of like overthrowing the regime in sort of, or waging war in liberal fashion, which I'm not even sure what exactly means. Sort of calling this like basically like a democratic republican sort of unification or bipartisan understanding of war.
Well, I think it's ridiculous to call America's foreign policy an addiction to war. That's a complete misunderstanding of what addiction is about. You could certainly look at our foreign policy and say that, both Democrats and Republicans have had, they've turned to that as a method of foreign policy, perhaps when they should have looked at other means. That's a legitimate possibility that could be explored. I'm not a fan of Bush's whole platform or his idea that we, could spread well, first of all, the whole idea of spreading democracy is, misguided. But the idea that we could spread, liberal or good ideas via military conquest. I mean, I don't know that that's something that I agree with. But this idea that that America, is addicted to war, or that we are trying to force the world to conform to something that we want, I think that's just anti-Americanism. I don't think there's much basis for that.
Jonathan, any thoughts?
Only that it underneath this real obvious veil of anti-Americanism, again, what he describes as being committed to hawkishness or committed to war, in my mind, I see as being committed to self-defense. And is that really what he is criticizing? Is that countries are committed to their own self-defense, and that, if you read not even the Roots of War, but if you read the nature of governments, government's role is your defense, the defense of your rights, including a strong military. And I, for one, am very happy that the U.S. has the strongest, most capable, advanced military in the world. And to me, I see that as a real value. I think he seems to see it as a slur, the fact that your own country would be committed to your self-defense by building up its armaments, etc.
Yeah. As somebody who is in Israel, is America doing everything on behalf of the Israeli state?
Of course, they all listen to me and what I have to say and do exactly the same. I have a few points in this regard. First of all, I think the most important point in this context is when dealing with a rationalist, never focus exclusively on his contradictions. Yes, rationalist will lead to many contradictions because he's detached from reality, yet focusing on them, only on the contradictions, might imply that you accept or neutral to his wrong premises. So when dealing with a rationalist, the best thing to do is just to point out his false premises and show how detached he is from reality, rather than just saying, oh, he said A, but then he said B, and they contradict. Like, don't go into his rationalistic game. And over here in the video we've showed, he identified a problem that has some sort of truth. United States went around the world, used force, and tried to spread democracy, and it didn't work. And what his error and his rationalizations is ignoring the context, ignoring the moral responsibility of judging the nature of the states surrounding you, whether they're free states or tyrannical regimes or dictatorships, whether they pose a threat to you or not, and act properly. He sees the case of the United States acted improperly after engaging war and just going for naive democracy instead of some sort of re-education or enforcing people to negate the notion of destroying the West or whatever, or destroying themselves. And he gets the wrong conclusion of that. He basically says, in essence, it is not possible for the United States to spread the Enlightenment as it did in the past. And this is false. The United States can and should defend itself against tyrannical regimes and sick cultures that aims to destroy it. And there are proper things to do after you militarily win such state. And the proper thing to do is not to say, okay, take democracy and vote for Hamas and vote for Taliban. And no, it's not the proper way. The proper way is, after you use force, use your control in the region to re-educate the people, like it was done in Japan after World War II, and like they did with Germany after World War II. And look at those countries today. Compare Japan and Germany today to Iraq and to Afghanistan. It's completely different because it was treated differently. And he just says, no, it's the United States, they just love war, and it's doomed to failure because war doesn't work. War is necessary in self-defense against tyrannical regimes and against aggressors. A tyrannical regime, as Ayn Rand said very eloquently, is worse than war because it is the source of war. So this is what ought to be removed.
Let's listen a bit more.
Right? Because Israel's supporters have a deep-seated interest in making sure that the United States has a remarkably powerful military and is willing to use that military in a rather liberal fashion, because they believe that if Israel ever gets into trouble and it needs help from the United States, the ideal situation is to have a U.S. military that's like a cocked gun. And if you think about the recent war between Israel and Iran, it really wasn't just between Israel and Iran.
No.
It was Israel and the United States against Iran, right?
Clearly.
Right? And the United States had a huge number of military assets in the Middle East, right, that were there in large part to help the Israelis in their war against Iran. Well, if you think about it, it makes perfectly sense if you're a supporter of Israel to want to make sure that the United States has a large military and that it is willing to use that military, and that if need be, it can help Israel if it gets into trouble.
I didn't hear any reference to American interests in that description.
Well, when it comes to Israel, right, and what Israel needs, right, that has little to do with American interests, right? The truth is...
Okay, let's pause it here. They'll go a little bit more into sort of American versus Israeli interest. But again, just think about it, right? Like he constantly tries to like make this about basically the Israeli control or apparent control of the American society, which I don't know where can that even stand from. Again, we are talking about Israel, a country of 10 million that is apparently controlling 330 million. How many citizens or how many people does America have? Like, where is this coming from, Stuart? This sort of, I think earlier in the chat, somebody said people should read Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which again is a completely made up propaganda document. But this obsession with sort of like Jews are controlling everything.
Yeah, I mean, it really does sound like the age-old trope of, yeah, somehow the Jews are so powerful that they're pulling the strings. It sounds like he's saying that the only reason the U.S. even bothers having this vast military is so that they can help Israel. It's like that's the whole point of the U.S. military. Wow. It's just absurd if you really think about what he seems to be saying. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and he also seems shocked that, like cut out of his discussion is any discussion of ideas and ideology, and the fact that, yes, in fact, the United States and Israel share a lot of basic fundamental ideologies about self-interest, about liberty, about pursuing money, about trade, as against Iran, which values mysticism, self-sacrifice, everything Allah. So, the expert just seems to kind of leave ideas off the table altogether. And, we've stressed so often that Israel really is this panacea in the Middle East amongst all this collectivism and all this mysticism and all this Islamism. There's a predominantly rights-respecting Israel, not dissimilar. If you go, Tel Aviv is not dissimilar to any major Western city, and it is the West's hope in the Middle East. So, yes, it is in America's interest, and my belief, that Israel not just be safe, but continue to thrive.
Yeah, and he'll talk more about sort of like the interest in a bit, but before that, Iyar, any of your thoughts?
I'd like to add to Jonathan. In the 18th century, in a world of barbaric or feudalic rule, there was a group of people who went after the philosophy of individualism, enlightenment, rights, and they formed the United States of America and brought those ideas of enlightenment to reality, to political implementation for the first time in history. And that was the birth of the United States of America that changed the whole world. And we live in a better, freer, safer, more prosperous world today, thanks to that process. And Israel did a similar thing in the Middle East. Israel brought the ideas of the Enlightenment to reality in the form of a free state for the first time in the barbaric Middle East. And I see this as the reason for the support in the United States for Israel. The people in the United States and the government in the United States for decades has identified that and therefore has been great fans of Israel. And by the way, in the past years, it's a process, like I think from 9/11, but in the past few years, we see it, the trend is speeding up significantly. We see a weakening for the support for Israel. And I see it intellectually as people in the United States abandoning the ideas of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've recently seen even a poll coming out of America that apparently the support for Israel is now below 50%. I think, I'm not sure if for the first time ever, but definitely the first time we have seen in a very long time. But let's listen to a bit more of Mearsheimer.
Any two countries in the world are going to have similar interests plus different interests.
Yes.
Right. So there's no question that Israel and the United States sometimes have similar interests,
yes,
and sometimes have different interests. Let me give you an example of this. The United States has a vested interest in making sure Iran does not have nuclear weapons.
Yes.
We're against proliferation. It's in the American national interest. It's obviously in Israel's national interest for Iran not to have nuclear weapons, right? So two states can have similar interests. In the case of Israel and the United States, they also happen to have different interests. And what we have in the United States is a situation where we have this thing called the Israel lobby, which I, of course, have written about with Steve Wald, which goes to great lengths to push the United States to support Israel unconditionally. In other words, no matter what Israel does, we are supposed to support Israel. And the lobby is so effective, it is so powerful, it is so effective that we basically end up supporting Israel unconditionally. What that means, Tucker, is in those cases where Israel's interests are not the same as America's interests, we support Israel. We support Israel's interests, not America's interests, because
over and against America's interests.
Of course, because the interests clash in those specific instances.
Right. Which is, as you noted at the outset.
So I think Ayn Rand had something, and I'm heavily paraphrasing, but when concepts are not defined or when specifics are not defined, it's evil that wins. So now he's talking about, Israel. He's talking about it in a very sort of agreeable way, right? Countries have, well, technically countries don't have interest, individuals in those countries do, but we can sort of talk about sort of collectively about, yeah, a country has, every country has good interest and different interest, right? But when he apparently Israeli lobby is like so powerful that even John Mearsheimer doesn't know what are the differing interests between America and Israel, because for the last 2 minutes he didn't mention one. I think he'll mention one in just a bit, but even that is purely nonsensical, and it shows you the fact that when you don't call out like, okay, give me a specific example of American interest that goes against Israeli interest, because there isn't any. When it comes to civilized society, when it comes to free society, there is no differing interest between those. Again, maybe Trump has convinced people that it's in American interest to put on tariffs because other countries are putting on tariffs. But no, EU tariffs on America, American tariffs on EU, whichever it goes, are bad for either of those countries, no matter if the other one does it. And in a similar way, it's with everything, because again, when we talk about national interest, we are talking about individual interest of the individuals in those countries, and there is no clash between individuals in a free and rational society. Stuart?
Yeah, I had that exact same response listening to him. I was waiting. I was like, what are these clashing interests? And of course, he doesn't bring any up because, as you said, you said maybe he comes up with something that is erroneous, but here he doesn't even come up with anything. And the reality is, as you said, that there are no clashing interests between rational men. He's just he's using a lot of fancy language and things that are true, like yes, not every two countries are going to their interests are going to align exactly. I mean, that's a truism to some extent, but in the broader sense, the problem is he tries to take morality out of every equation. He is always acting as though there is no right or wrong. There is no morality here. But in broad moral terms, as I said, there are no clashes. There may be specific little areas where this might be better for one country than another, but in broad terms, as you pointed out with tariffs, it's like no, they're just bad. They're just bad for everyone. It's not actually a clash between countries.
Yeah, and okay, I forgot how slowly John Mearsheimer
Wait, but
speaks.
Daniel,
so
I have a point on that though.
yeah, sure, you can go.
I think we're not framing it properly, because when he talks about interest, we answer from an objective perspective, which is right, but it misses the context of his point. He's not talking about objective interest. I don't think he can understand objective interest since he's a rationalist. He's talking about policies, and he doesn't care if those policies are rational or irrational, which means he doesn't care if those policies stems from reality or from man's nature or from morality or from proper politics. He only cares about the internal logic of such policies, regardless of the facts of reality. And he's also factually wrong. And you know it, because when Israel wanted to kill Nasrallah, the United States tried to stop them. And when Israel wanted to attack Iran, the United States wanted to stop them. And eventually, they managed to score a deal with Trump to finally initiate an attack on Iran. But eventually, they were stopped after 12 days, and the regime is still standing, even though Israel at least implicitly aims to remove this horrible regime. And this view on interest, this rationalistic view on interest, holds a very interesting premise. Now, as I said, when you deal with a rationalist, check his premises. And the very interesting premise in this interview, in the chemistry of this interview, is an implied moral sanction for the Ayatollah regime. When they say, whether they call it Israeli lobby or Israel dragging the United States into war, they're never condemning Iran. They never talk about the essence of the Ayatollah regime and the moral condemnation it deserves, starting from its ideology of Islamism, of destroying the West, to its actions against its own people, and the funding and running of terror rings around the world that killed Americans. Why do they evade those facts? Why do they give moral sanction to Iran? And I think it's, and again, another rationalistic premise is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They hate the Jews so much. They hate freedom so much. They hate the Ukrainians so much. They embrace whatever tyrannical regime is running against them.
Yeah, and I'll bring up a few more things he says because if we have to go through all of it, we won't have time to cover almost anything. But first, a quick thought on what you said about Iran. I mean, we had Anna Kasparian on Tucker Carlson, right, who said, well, thankfully, after the American-Israeli strike on the nuclear sites of Iran, thankfully, Iran held back and Iran, de-escalated. So it was like Iran who was the good guy here, who prevented it. And so I'll bring up one of the things he said where Tucker straight up asked him, like, is there like a differing interest? And he brings up the two-state solution, that it's in American interest to have a two-state solution because it would mean peace in the Middle East, or sort of more peace. And it's in and Israel doesn't want that. Now, Jonathan, I don't know about you, but how is the two-state solution in American interest? Now, again, if we are in the land of impossible, where two-state solution means a peaceful Palestinian state with Palestinians not wanting any war, then yes, that is better. If every country is peaceful, yes, that is a preferable situation, but that's not what two-state solution would actually mean.
Well, Gaza could have been, the I don't know, the Hong Kong of the Middle East. I mean, it really could have been, but all that money, those dollars were, invested into a war machine and not into actually establishing a state, a constitution, and respecting rights. What I just thought was most interesting about this clip was that, once again, this notion of that there's this secret cabal of moneyed, aka likely Jewish interests behind the scenes, controlling it all. And, he's going to bring it to us. He knows the real dirt about, what's going on. And it's always this behind the scenes cabal of which Israel is, at the center.
Yeah, I mean, Stuart, what do you make of sort of this again? Oh, I can bring up one more thing. When he is asked by Tucker Carlson if there ever was a time where Israel wanted to do something and America didn't do so, because like if Israeli lobby is in control, this shouldn't ever happen. And he said, well, you could say the last year when Biden was in power, Israel didn't attack Iran when it wanted to. And I mean, my immediate reaction was, so Israeli lobby is not powerful. It like cannot do anything. It was stopped from attacking Iran under Biden. It was almost stopped. Like the pager attack probably wouldn't happen if Israel didn't check with U.S. It didn't check with the U.S. and probably wouldn't happen if it did try to. So I mean, Stuart, what is this kind of thing like? Because it's almost like fulfilling prophecy, right? Whenever Israel does something or America does something, it's because of the Israeli lobby, but when it doesn't, well, blank out.
Yeah, I mean, that's an obvious blank out there. I mean, the U.S., it seems to me the U.S. has been thwarting Israel in, really the last several years in terms of, it's hard to know what Israel would do if the U.S. Were fully behind them. But the reality is that the U.S. hasn't been for a long time. And Biden restrained them. Trump has restrained them. The idea that, I mean, there is an Israel lobby, but the idea that it's all powerful and it's calling the shots is just, that doesn't hold up. That's not the reality if you've been paying attention at all to world affairs the last few years.
And I want to play one more clip that I think Yar mentioned a bit earlier. But first, we have a super chat from Roland. Thank you so much. He says, Israel may control America, but Switzerland controls Israel. This super chat is clear evidence of that. And he also, of course, sent 5 Swiss. I'm trying to remember
Francs.
Francs. Oh, yeah. Okay. Swiss francs. Yeah. Definitely taking control of ER with those francs, who of course is in charge of the all of the American government. He has Trump on his speed dial. but we also have somebody in the chat says, it's not our interest to support Israel, to oppress and colonize the Palestinian people. We have much more business interests with the Arabs. There is no morality involved in politics. And any thoughts on that comment, yeah?
Well, it's wonderful to see how people as such disconnect politics from morality and thus giving moral sanction to the most evil regimes on earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this idea that sort of America has business with Arabs. First of all, of course, a country should have no business with anything. This is not the purpose of government. The purpose of government is not to make deals with some dictators in the Middle East for whatever, no matter what. It's if individuals want to interact with those with individuals in those countries, or maybe in some instances even with the governments or sort of like state companies of those places, then it's their sort of choice, but it shouldn't be. It's not on America to do anything like that. We have a super chat from Christopher. Thank you so much. And as Bonnie points out in the chat, death to America isn't immoral. Well, according to that person, probably not. Death to America is, of course, the slogan of not only the Houthis, but also of Iranian regime itself, of Hezbollah, and of pretty much any group associated with these groups. But let's listen to a separate clip I had when I think he specifically talks about October 7th.
You want to remember that when the Zionists come to Israel, starting in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there are remarkably few Jews in Palestine. And those Jews are not Zionists. The Zionists are the Jews who come from Europe.
Right.
And they understand that they're moving into a territory that's filled with Palestinian villages and Palestinian people. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how can you create a Jewish state on a piece of territory that's filled with Palestinians without doing ethnic cleansing, massive ethnic cleansing? And the answer is you can't. So they're talking about and thinking about ethnic cleansing from the get-go. So the idea that they wouldn't think of what the situation looks like after October 7th is an opportunity to do ethnic cleansing, you know, it belies.
So it wasn't really a land without people for a people without land.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And David Ben-Gurion, Vladimir Jabotinsky, all these key Zionist leaders understood that full well. And they understood that they were going to have to do horrible things to the Palestinians. They understood that. And they were explicit in saying that they did not blame the Palestinians 1 second for resisting what the Jews from Europe were going to do to them. They fully understood that they were stealing their land. And they fully understood that it made perfect sense for the Palestinians to resist, which of course they did. But anyway.
Yeah, but anyway is the only way you can say after. There is so much, and I'm not sure who said it earlier, but he really is relying on somebody who has no idea of history. Because first he talks about stealing their land. There was no stealing of their land when Jews were coming in for the first time. They were buying the land. They were or going to an empty land. There was no stealing. You cannot talk about any idea of stealing. He talks about how the Zionist leaders understood what it would take. Now, I know what specifically he's talking about, but he didn't bring up the examples of, for example, Ben-Gurion talking about what it would mean for an Israeli state to establish. So he's simply throwing it there without any evidence. Then he's talking about how this wouldn't be possible without ethnic cleansing. So how is the Israeli state here when Arabs are still in the region? How is this possible that, Israeli state wouldn't be possible without ethnic cleansing? But there are Arabs within the Israeli state and also Arabs in the sort of the greater Israel he talks about. So yeah, I mean, Stuart, even talking about it, right? The Jews coming to sort of, I guess, the land of Palestine, if we want to refer it to like that. And the territory was filled with Palestinian people. Again, no such thing as Palestinian back then. And what does it mean for like a land to be like filled with people? Where did they move? If it was already full.
I mean, there's so many bad ideas, fallacies in what he said. I mean, I think he's relying on this notion that, some sort of collective, owns the land regardless of who actually owns the land. As you said, the Jews came in and bought land. They didn't steal land, they bought land. But to the mind of a collectivist, that doesn't matter. That's, that they're coming into this collective area that is Arab, that, like I said, it wasn't Palestinian at the time. But the Jews did not have a right to be there because the collective Arabs, were already there. That's ridiculous. Anyone has the right to go in and buy land, and that's what the Jews did. And they did, the land that they bought, they made valuable. Much of the land was cheap because there was nothing there. This, for thousands of years, the Arab population hadn't done much with it. The Jews came in and they irrigated and they drained swamps and they planted and they built and they made something out of it. And that's ultimately where the resentment, I think, comes from.
We have a super chat from Christopher. Thank you so much. Somebody says, yes, there are Arabs. What left of them, hundreds of thousands were ethnically cleansed, making them minority. I mean, if you want to say that the Israeli lobby is also controlling the Arab armies that like attacked Israel when it was founded, which was supposed to be, I think, 45% Arab. So almost half of Israel was supposed to be an Arab population, but the surrounding Arab states attacked it. So if you want to say that the Jews orchestrated that, then yeah, I guess we can go with that. But yeah, I mean,
well, yeah. I do want to point out that the ethnic cleansing that did happen was at the direct order of the Arab countries surrounding Israel. They ordered the Arabs to leave. It was not Israel that ordered them to leave. Israel was happy to let any of them stay. The ones that fled on the orders of the Arab governments.
Jonathan, you're muted.
The fact that this, I don't know when this interview came out, but that, it's being distributed, in this gentleman so casually comments that he thinks Israel saw October 7th just as an excuse to engage in ethnic cleansing. Like, it was
this was 5 days ago, by the way, just so we have the.
So this is so that comes out at the same time we see this video of this hostage who looks like a complete skeleton being forced to dig his own grave. That has nothing to do with the fact of why Israel is at war. Israel was just looking forward to going to do this, according to this guy. They were chomping at the bit to go to war. And, because all Israel is about is ethnic cleansing, apparently. So, the fact that is being perpetrated or perpetuated at the same time that we're seeing, if you want to talk about genocide, we're seeing an actual, person wasting away with these hostages, the ones that are still alive, being forced to fill their own graves, having that videotape and then distributed. Disgusting on all fronts.
Yeah.
I can't believe you've left me only 5 minutes to discuss Mearsheimer's horrible, false view on this matter, but I'll do my best. So Mearsheimer basically frames Zionism as some sort of a European colonial project to steal land with Palestinians and to commit ethnic cleansing. And for me, it is just one more evidence for his sick, completely delusional rationalization. He goes to 1918 to search for text in Yiddish by Ben Gurion talking about where the agency should buy land. and he treats it as proof as if the Zionist movement is a movement to perform ethnic cleansing. This is completely irrational, and in the same time ignoring what people who define themselves as Palestinians are saying today. This is complete madness. Now, it's also funny that he calls people under Levant, the area, geographic area under the Ottoman rule in the 19th century. It's so weird that he calls them Palestinians. Like, this area was regarded as either Damascus, Syria, Beirut, or Jerusalem, or the Levant. There was not at all Palestine. It was an obscure historic name given to Judea by the Romans and had no use until the British Mandate. So it's just weird. The thing with the land is simple. It was under Ottoman rule. There was Jews coming there for ideological reasons, as mentioned by Stuart, buying land legally. And then in the 1920s, under the British mandate and the rise of the Zionist movement, which is an ideological movement and not a movement of European Jews, but ideological movement for Jews around the world that are being persecuted and want to have an autonomy so they can keep themselves from being murdered. So they came to the Levant, to what is called either Ottoman Empire or later on Palestine, and did one important thing that is very historically important. They eradicated malaria in the region. Until the 1920s, there was no truly permanent people living in the area of the Levant, unless some obscure communities, because of malaria. It was just like you were being killed by this disease. And the Jews, the Zionists came to this area and they planted trees and cleared the swamps and did all kinds of things to eradicate malaria using rationale, using labor that is based on thought, on rational thought, and they cleared the area from malaria. And that's what led to people settling in the area, working, creating civilization. It was the effort made by Zionist men. And I want to add a point on the purchase of property and the fact that Mearsheimer sees the purchase of properties by Jews, like Jews buying properties from Arabs, and he sees this as ethnic cleansing. This is such a racist premise. He like, I'm trying to understand his mind. Like, what does he think? He think like individuals must have the supposed will of the race. So if an Arab sells a house to a Jew, the Jew is oppressing him because it's against the premises of the race. What the hell is he talking about? And I want to add one more point because we're out of time. And it's very important because people addressing some facts of the War of 1948 out of context. Zionists and Jews kept purchasing land until basically 1947. They did it fair and square. And throughout the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, Jews in Israel were attacked by Arab, but they were still being very defensive. And even in 1947, when basically a civil war broke and Arabs started murdering and massacring Jews in that region, they were still focusing on performing defensive act, and they were saving their own territories and towns and not invading Arab towns, including when they were attacked, not only until 1948, when Israel declared independence, and then 7 Arab nations invaded Israel. Only then Israel performed self-defense in the form of also offensive operations, which are necessary. And only then, when mostly Arabs left from orders from Arab leaders or for whatever reasons, only then did Israel seize control over deserted property. But this is in the context of war, of them being attacked by 7 foreign nations. And this is a completely different context than fair and square trading. So up to 1948, the Zionist movement was extremely respectful of the rights of its surrounding neighbors, sometimes in such a way that I see it as not just. We should have defended ourselves more. Only when we're in complete war, in a risk of annihilation, of Arab armies coming with the explicit goal of throwing the Jews to the sea, only then we started to really defend ourselves and take land that is justly deserved to a country in self-defense against a foreign aggressor. And this is a very important context to understand. And by the way, ethnic cleansing, and just one more thing, the most explicit and in your face ethnic cleansing in the Middle East was in the surrounding nations around Israel. Since Israel was established, Jews were all their property was taken away, and they were just basically deported out of all of the Muslim countries surrounded with nothing on their behalf. They had to be rescued by Israel. Otherwise, they would be either massacred or deported or whatever, just for being Jews. So
we have a super chat from Christopher. Thank you so much. Jonathan, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you? You're muted.
Just thank you to our audience. And my most recent book is Can You Really Love a Dog?
Stuart, any last thoughts, and where can people find you?
I think IR signed some things up well. So you can find me at stuartmargolis.substack.com and also on Facebook.
And we have The Cutting Edge coming back today. So make sure to join us on its own channel. So putting the link in the chat, you can check out that. We'll see you there in half an hour.
Daniel.
Yeah?
I'd like to tell people where they can find me.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm an associate of the Ayn Rand Center Israel. Please visit aynrand.org.il/about. And I'm also a leading member in the Victory Now movement. We're working on a book aimed to be released soon in English and in Hebrew called Victory Now. It shows a plan for a decisive Israeli victory and the very important moral basis for such plan and victory. Thank you very much. It's www.victory.now.
And all of that is going to be in the description. So thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you in half an hour on Cutting Edge. Until then, bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.